Couple of things. I'm really excited to be here today. I think this is a topic that many women we don't get a lot of information on, right? And this is one of the downsides to women's health. I think it's really important to recognize that women's health is not often studied, okay? We use men's health for a lot of information on overall health. Okay, so today my goal is to provide you some information about what's happening to your body right now. Okay, so that can be very powerful in making decisions moving forward. So knowledge is power. So my goal is to give you some information about what's happening to your body. And for the purposes of this meeting, we're talking about weight loss. Okay, so obviously, menopause is very multifaceted, but today, for the purposes of today, we are talking weight loss piece, okay? So I want to talk about that. Now, how many of you are incredibly put in the chat, frustrated right now? Just say yes in the chat. I am frustrated with either perimenopause or menopausal symptoms. Say yes. Amen. Let's put it in there. Okay. So we see it going on here. Yes, everybody's frustrated. It's a very frustrating process. There's not a lot of information. And that is my goal today, is to provide you some information, help you feel a little bit better, not alone, that it is possible to manage these symptoms. Okay, so that is my goal of today. You might be thinking to yourself, why in the world is this 34-year-old talking to me about perimenopause and menopausal symptoms? Because you're going, she hasn't been through that. Oh my gosh, she has no idea how hard it is. So I want to provide you some context. So a couple of things about me, if I have not met you yet. Hello, my name is Kate Lavick, and I am the owner and operator of Beyond Measure Fitness Training, as well as a one-on-one nutrition coach, okay, for our gym. I've worked with hundreds of women, okay, typically. I have worked with some men, but mostly I work with women. Been doing this for 12 years, okay? And it is a passion of mine to help women with weight loss. Myself, the reason why I feel as though I can speak on this topic is I have PCOS. Okay, so for those that don't know, it's polycystic ovarian syndrome, very similar to perimenopause. Okay, so similar symptoms, hormone levels are exactly the same. Weight loss is extremely challenging, but you can manage the symptoms. Okay, and I've had it since puberty. So I've dealt with this my entire life. Okay. So for those that haven't experienced hormonal imbalance and you're just experiencing it in your 40s and 50s, I've had to learn how to manage it through puberty. Okay. Well into my 30s, and had to learn the process. Okay. To manage all of the symptoms of PCOS. Okay. So similar, same thing, progesterone levels are almost exactly the same as what it's like in perimenopause, okay? So you might be wondering, like, how the heck can she speak on that? But it's just as frustrating for me, okay? So I feel you, I understand. It is frustrating, okay? So I see you, I know, I get it, okay? So we're gonna talk about that today, but I wanted to let you know kind of where I was coming from. So as we move forward here, same thing, save some of your larger questions for the end, okay? But I will ask some questions throughout, all right? So let's get moving here. I don't think we have anybody in the waiting room or anything like that, okay? So I think we're good. So we're gonna move forward here, and everybody's good. Give me a thumbs up. Everybody can see my presentation. Everybody's good. Fabulous, wonderful. All right, let's get moving here. Okay, so first thing you might be asking yourself, okay, is this normal? What's happening to me? Okay. Is this a normal process of life? Absolutely. Okay. This is completely normal. Don't feel like there's anything wrong with you. Okay. So there's nothing wrong with you right now. If you are in menopause, approaching menopause, experiencing menopausal symptoms, there is nothing wrong with you. It is a normal, natural process. Okay. why does it happen? Why does menopause even happen? I don't know if any of you have ever even thought of that. There are a few theories out there. One of them being it is a way to keep us alive longer, actually. So if we were reproducing, I know right now, for those of you that don't know, I'm actually 6.5 months pregnant. And I don't know about you, but I don't really want to be giving birth in my 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I don't know about you, but one of the reasons being is that childbirth in the past, you would pass away a lot of the time, right? So the more children you have, you would actually not be able to live on to take care of your offspring. Okay, if we continue to reproduce well into our 70s and 80s, okay, so the process is like, okay, we need to make this stop so that they can live a longer life. Okay, so that's one theory. The second theory is it's actually called the grandmother hypothesis. Okay, and it is that women are actually responsible, okay, it's just from a human aspect, for keeping their lineage alive, okay? So it's, you are not having children to take care of your children, but then you're taking care of your grandchildren, if that makes sense. So you are actually helping to keep your children plus their children alive. And if you're focused on a newborn baby, that's not going to be very helpful, right? Of your own newborn baby. So there are two hypotheses and theories to why menopause even happens. But ultimately, it keeps you alive longer. Okay, that's the theory, is that we're not producing babies into our 80s and potentially going through childbirth. Okay. So I hope that's maybe some new information for you, but what the heck is menopause? It's, menopause is like this huge buzzword right now too. Like you'll see it everywhere, right? Perimenopause, menopause, what to do about it, and what does it even mean? And it's such a complex, long process that I think it's important just to overall know that ultimately what menopause is it's just the decrease in reproductive hormones. Okay, so that's ultimately the bottom line, and everything else is a symptom of those decreased hormones. Does that make sense? It's not like menopause is this like magical diagnosis. It's like, no, it's just that we have our reproductive hormones have slowed down. And so now it's causing, okay, other symptoms to happen because those hormones are not communicating properly, okay, anymore. So, for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to be talking hormones a little bit. And so I want to make sure we're all on the same page of what that means as well, because you may hear that's kind of a buzzword right now too. Oh, hormones is why this is happening. Hormones, hormones. So what the heck are hormones? They're just chemical messengers, okay? So they coordinate the functions in your body, all of the functions in your body. You have all kinds of different hormones, not just reproductive hormones. You have hunger hormones. When you get excited, adrenaline is a hormone, okay? And basically they carry out the functions of daily life for you, okay, in your body. And right now there's about 50 actually identified and studied hormones in the body, which is pretty crazy because that actually doesn't seem like a whole lot to me. There's only about 50 that are very, very studied, but the belief is that they're up to 200. So think about all the things that we do not know yet about hormones or about how they affect our health, etc. Right? It's pretty amazing. So hormones are just chemical messengers, okay? They tell your brain to your stomach when to stop eating. They trigger when you should be ovulating, right? All of those things. So that's what they're meant to do. So wanted to cover those bases before we get moving here, okay? All right, so how many of you have gone to a physician and they have just said, oh, it's just a part of life, almost like you just kind of have to accept where you're at. And it's just what's gonna happen to you. You're gonna gain weight, you're gonna have hot flashes, you're just gonna be miserable. And it's just the way that life is. Say I in the chat if you've had somebody say that to you, or a physician, or maybe they haven't explained the process to you very well. Anybody had a bad experience with that? I know from my own experience going to a doctor with PCOS and being told, like, basically you're crazy, right? Anybody had that? Like, you're crazy, all that stuff. I'm sure there are a few of us in there that have felt that way. Okay. So I'm here to tell you that we can manage these symptoms, and physicians are not giving patients enough individualized time right now. Okay. So they are having to cram a lot of people in all at once. And I'm not saying it's their fault, but they're kind of like on a get you in, get you out basis. All right. And they're like, yep, just the way it is. Okay, yep, you gotta exercise and eat right. You know, who's heard that? Just exercise and eat right. It's like, well, that's great, but like what do I need to do? Like, what's going to actually help me? So that's what we're here for today, okay? All right, so as we move on here, I just want to give you kind of the roundabout of when things start to happen and why you might wake up one day in your 50s and go, oh my gosh, like, how did I get here? Right? And it all starts in what we call perimenopause. Okay, so you might not even realize that you are experiencing symptoms in your 30s and 40s that are menopausal symptoms, because you might be only experiencing a few of them. But a bulk of the symptoms are going to happen anywhere between 35 and 50. Okay, so that's where all of the things start ramping up. Then you get to your 50s and it just goes right. Okay. But it's slow and gradual. So you might say something like, oh yeah, I have dry eyes and a little bit of insomnia, but oh, maybe it's allergies, right? And not realizing that that's a symptom. You know, you might be like, oh yeah, I'm kind of anxious, but yeah, it's new to me. Like, I don't know what's going on. And I'm gaining a little bit of weight, but it's not anything totally unmanageable. And then all of a sudden you wake up 2 to 3 years later and you go, whoa, I don't know what happened. I just gained 30 pounds, but I don't know how. How is this happening to me? So perimenopause is tricky. So many of you, if you are in your 50s, 40s right now, this is fabulous that you're taking action and listening to this today. But I want to tell you, a lot of people should be listening to this in their 30s. That's primarily when you should start a process of managing the symptoms of menopause. And nobody tells you that. No physicians tell you that. Nobody tells you, your OBGYN doesn't tell you that, but that's when it should start. Okay. So perimenopause is 35 to about 50. Okay. Then you're going to reach menopause. The average age, just so you know, for actual menopause is 51. Okay. So it can range though. Some people are much later, some people are even earlier. Okay. So it just kind of depends. But the average age is 51. At this point, the ovaries are no longer releasing estrogen. Okay. And you will not be able to reproduce at this point. This is when physical changes that are very health related and potentially dangerous, okay, or damaging, like heart disease, osteoporosis, you see incontinence starts, and that's, hormones not working appropriately, things like that begin here, okay? And sometimes that's just because we have not prepared the body in the 40s, in your 40s, for your 50s, okay? So just be aware of that. Okay. Then we can go on to post-menopause. Okay, so this can happen. It also depends on when you've had your last period, but usually it's after a full year has passed, and post-menopausal phase will last 1 to 5 years, and your symptoms will begin to subside. Okay. According to some studies, 40% of women will still experience hot flashes. okay, during this time, but most of the other symptoms will start to subside for you, okay? All right, so I wanted to cover all those bases because I don't think that we talk enough about when does all this stuff actually happen, okay? If any of you remember like the middle school conversation about when you get your period, which was like so brief and like, oh yeah, this is what happens, but there was no like, how does it work? What happens? Any of that. It's kind of similar with menopause. They're just like, oh yeah, you just go through menopause. It's like, well, yeah, but when do these things happen, right? So I think that's really important to establish the timeline for menopause, okay? So for the purposes, again, of this conversation, we're talking about the symptom of weight gain when it comes to menopause. Why do we see weight gain in menopause? Well, the number one reason is decrease in muscle mass. Okay, so a decrease in your muscle mass is going to mean a decrease in your basal metabolic rate. Okay, so your basal metabolic rate is the rate at which you burn calories when you are just sitting. Okay, the reason this can creep up on people and all of a sudden they end up in their late 40s and 50s and they just start piling on weight, right? They feel like they look at a food and they're just gaining weight is because in your 30s, 40s, and 50s, you will lose anywhere between 3 to 8% of your muscle mass, okay, just in the aging process. Okay, so every 10 years, you're losing 3 to 8% muscle mass. Muscle mass is responsible for metabolic function, okay? It is 100% responsible for it. So the less muscle mass you have, the more body fat you're going to get, okay? So that also means that the amount of calories that you burn a day just by hanging out, okay, is going to be very limited. So inadvertently, not on purpose, okay, so not on purpose, you are probably going to be eating too many calories. Okay, so that's called a calorie surplus. All right, the frustrating thing about this, and I want to comment on this because there's nothing worse than a 22-year-old trainer telling you you just need to eat less and move more. Okay, there's nothing more annoying than that. And the reason they're not wrong, but they also are not acknowledging that it is much more difficult when your basal metabolic rate has lost 30% of its muscle mass, okay, than it did when you were in your 20s. It is way easier in your 20s to be in a calorie deficit than it is in your 50s. There's zero question, okay? So they're not wrong, but they're also not acknowledging that it is way more challenging. Okay, so there's nothing more frustrating for me to hear that when somebody's like, oh, it's just, oh, I'm sure it frustrates you too. If so, if you've had somebody who's in their 20s tell you that, put yes in the chat because that's one of my most frustrating things I hear. It's like, oh, well, of course it's easy for you. Your basal metabolic rate's through the roof. You still get to eat pizza whenever you want and lose weight. That's not fair, So that's one of the main causes, okay? We can't deny that thermodynamics is the main reason why we gain weight, okay, in menopause. It's because your body is not going to burn as many calories as it used to, okay? So you have to adjust your caloric intake or your caloric output, all right? And it's much harder to do, okay? So just know that you're not crazy, that it is harder, all right? But that is one of the reasons, okay? More energy that you're not using stores as body weight, okay? So as we continue on here, so that's reason number one. Reason number two is going to be insulin resistance, okay? Insulin resistance, so insulin is a hormone, okay? And it's secreted by the pancreas. And its sole purpose is to help use carbohydrates and glycogen as energy, Okay, so when you're eating, let's use an example. We'll use a donut because it's here. Okay, so we'll use the donut. So when you eat a donut, obviously your blood sugar is going to increase. The pancreas is supposed to secrete insulin in order to use up that energy, okay, and not store it. The issue as as your metabolic rate decreases, your muscle mass decreases, your body fat's going to increase and you're going to become insulin resistant, meaning your pancreas is not going to release insulin the way that it used to when it was 20 years old. Okay. So what that means is any extra sugar, which is also called glycogen or like carbs, if you want to think of it as that way, is going to be stored as body fat. Okay. So that can be really frustrating during this time because what do you usually crave when you have low energy? Carbs. It's going to be carbs and sugar. It's the quickest source of energy. So you end up, when you have insulin resistance, you end up on this constant wheel of, I need more energy, so I reach for sugar or carbs, right? And then my body stores anything I'm not using. Instead of using it up, it stores it as body fat, and you never use that stored energy. Okay, so you can never access that stored energy like someone might in their 20s and even early 30s might be able to access that. Okay. So ultimately, it's the inefficient use of carbohydrates and glycogen. Okay, so your body's just not using them the way that they should be. Glucose then hangs out in the bloodstream, as you can see, and then it triggers this need for more carbohydrates, right? So I think this is really powerful here because some of you might be like, I cannot stop eating sweets, or that's the first thing I go to for energy. And it's because of this, and you do have the power to control it. But I think this is the most important piece here is the knowledge is power and knowing that this is what's happening. Your body's not secreting insulin. So it's not using your food appropriately. Okay. So, we're going to move on from insulin resistance, but this happens. Okay, so and I also want to comment on how it happens. So this is kind of where insulin resistance for menopause purposes typically starts to happen through perimenopause because you're slowly in that caloric surplus, right? So as you slowly gain weight without realizing it, right? So it's over like a 15-year process that you become insulin resistant. It's going to be much harder, right, for you to process those carbohydrates. Okay, so I think that's really important to talk about. Insulin resistance is manageable. Okay, so we're going to talk about how it's manageable, but it is for like someone like me with PCOS, it's genetic for me. So it's not reversible, but manageable. Men, they can actually reverse their insulin resistance. So that's why you're not crazy with that either. It's much, much easier for them because they don't have all these other hormones that they have to manage. Okay, so just be mindful of that. Again, you're not crazy. It's 100% true. Okay, so next cause is you have other hormonal changes happening too. We have tons of hormones, like we said, going on in the body. So I'm just going to focus on these because this is why you might see the scale increase, but for some reason. Okay. So number one is a decrease in progesterone. So when you have a decrease in progesterone, it's going to increase your stress response. Okay, your stress response is going to be responsible for cortisol, which is also a hormone, which stores belly fat. Okay, so if you're in a high stress situation all the time, you're going to store energy. Okay, so you're going to store, typically it ends up as belly fat. All right. So that decrease in progesterone can be, of course, working against you. The next one is fluctuating levels of estrogen. So, perimenopause, it can go way high and then way low, and it kind of does this wonky dance for a little while. And this is super responsible for a lot of digestive things. Okay, so and water retention. So if you're somebody who holds a lot of water, which Most people, most women in menopause are going to hold on to a lot of water, a lot of inflammation. Okay. And that's what estrogen, that's the issue with estrogen. Okay. So any drastic change in levels of estrogen are going to cause that, along with inflammation, constipation is another one. And then the other ones I wanted to talk about, because you're also not crazy if you feel like you cannot stop eating something, is because there's a decrease as you get into menopause of the fullness hormone called leptin, and an increase in the hunger hormone called ghrelin. Okay. So you can only imagine what that means. It means you're going to have moments where you feel like over consuming. Okay. So we call that like a binge behavior. There are some people that live with this their entire lives. Okay. So if you're someone who has lived with something like this feeling your whole life, you've probably had an insulin issue your entire life. Okay. And as well as leptin and ghrelin, where they're not communicating properly. If you're just experiencing this in menopause, this might be a whole new feeling to you, where you're like, whoa, I need to eat a whole pizza. I need to eat all of this stuff, right? You're not crazy. This is what's happening. Your leptin and ghrelin are not communicating. Okay, so they're not communicating from your brain to your stomach. Stop, I'm full. Okay, so that leads to overconsumption, which then leads to caloric surplus, which then leads to insulin resistance, and the cycle goes on and on and on. Okay, everybody follow me? Give me a thumbs up if we're good. Excellent, good. Hopefully we're learning something there. So hormones, there's all kinds of other hormonal changes, but for the purposes of, again, weight gain, I wanted to focus on these. Okay. So what do we do? What do we do to manage this? Okay. How to lose weight? How are we going to do it? Okay. Number one, you have to focus on increasing your muscle mass and decreasing your body fat. So what does this mean? You need to strength train, okay, 3 times per week. And what strength training means is you need to have, it needs to be challenging. Okay. So it can't be, something that's simple and easy for you, because you're not building muscle. You have to build muscle or build up that basal metabolic rate that we talked about at the beginning in order to burn more calories. Okay. So you have to strength train 3 times per week and challenge yourself with that strength training. So this is for my people that haven't been strength training. Right now, body weight stuff might be challenging for you. That's great. Okay, so that's okay. For those of you that have been going to the gym or strength training for the last 6 months, and you're maybe just kind of like going in and just doing the motions and maybe not really challenging yourself, this is where you can improve. Okay, you've got to up the weight. So you have to have, the muscle has to have a stimulus. Okay, so it has to have something hard or challenging in order to change and rebuild itself. Okay, so you've got to strength train. The second piece of this is then we also have to support that muscle with protein, a minimum, bare minimum of 100 grams of protein per day. Okay. Next piece of this is staying in a caloric deficit. You may have to reverse diet if your basal metabolic rate is too low. So what happens in menopause in particular, your basal metabolic rate is so low that the amount of calories that you can consume is so low in order to be in a deficit that we have to actually either do it through more movement, so strength training or like walking and things like that, or reverse diet you, okay, which is like a whole nother topic, but we would have to do something like that. Other things that you can do here, supplementation, okay, so increasing your muscle mass here, having a good whey protein powder, and creatine. Creatine is the #1 most studied supplement ever, okay? There are so many cognitive benefits to it. As we age, it decreases how quickly you lose muscle mass as you age. too. So it's way more important as you get into your 40s and 50s to supplement with that. I will say, be aware that with creatine, don't freak out if you take it for a couple days, the first 2 days, 2 or 3 days, you'll retain a little bit of water. Okay, so you're not gaining weight, it's just a little bit of water, and then that water flushes after about 2 to 3 days of loading on creatine. But very, very helpful in maintaining as much muscle mass as you possibly can. Okay, so we've got to put on some muscle. Okay, that's going to make your life so much simpler and not as frustrating when it comes to the dieting part of it. Okay, so you've got to put on muscle. All right, next thing is, of course, being in a caloric deficit. We all know this. Thermodynamics, you can't get away from it. Okay, so things that you can do: track your intake. Okay, be aware that when you track your intake, it can be anywhere between 20 and 30% off. Okay, so if you've been one of those people who have tracked your food, you're like, I'm tracking and everything's good and I'm hitting my numbers, it's possible that you're 20 to 30% off because of a couple things. 20% is because the food labels that we have, okay, that we're using to track, legally can be off from 20 to 30%. And then we also have that 10% can be just human error, right? You accidentally, you say it's a cup, but it's really a cup and a half or something like that, right? So be aware that legally labels can be off by that much. Okay, so if you're feeling like I'm doing everything right and all this is happening, it's very possible that you're still not in a caloric deficit. Okay, so just be aware. Next piece, or advice would be to focus on volume eating. So many people in menopause in particular will tell me, man, I don't eat anything and I'm gaining weight. And I look at what they're eating and it's typically not whole foods, because again, they're in that cycle, right, of needing higher sugar, higher carb things. So they'll be like, well, I had a bagel and then I had, a protein bar, and then I had, it's like so minimal. And then they're like, and then I had this bigger dinner, right? And that was, let's say it's like fish tacos, and I don't know, that sounded good. So fish tacos, rice, and broccoli or something. Okay. But they had like little bites of here and there and other things. And so what my suggestion is to focus on, instead of having one thing that's really calorie dense, like a bagel can be pretty calorie dense depending on what kind it is, and is also all carbs. Okay, which again, we know now that because of insulin resistance, you're going to retain, or a lot of that bagel, if it's not eaten with a protein, is going to store as body fat. Okay, if you are menopausal. So what we know is, instead of the bagel, like, let's have a cup and a half of egg whites. Okay, that's a lot. Okay, volume eating for very minimal calories, tons of protein. Let's have a cup and a half of that, and let's throw some spinach in, and let's add lots of vegetables. Okay, a lot of fiber. Again, keep the glucose levels down as much as possible. So focus on eating more of whole foods. Okay, more, lots of volume. Two diets that, I don't like saying diet, but if you're someone who's like what does this really look like? Of course, with the carbohydrates, the two most studied are Mediterranean and paleo for anyone who's experiencing menopausal symptoms that can be very helpful. So if you're someone who wants to kind of look into those things. Next piece is drinking enough water. Make sure you're drinking half your body weight in ounces of water a day. That's going to keep you fuller longer. Okay. And then, of course, exercising. We have to have an output. You have to have energy output in order to see change on the scale. Okay. Next piece. Manage that insulin resistance, that pesky insulin resistance. That's so frustrating. That's why most of you are frustrated. So I want to tell you that this is the main reason right here. What's the number one way to manage insulin resistance? It's exercise. It is. There is tons of research on this, and the number one way is strength training. It's not high intensity interval training. It's not step aerobics. It's not anything. It's challenging strength training. And what that means is it's going to actually make you more insulin sensitive. Okay. And that's what we want to do. We want to make your body more insulin sensitive and actually excrete insulin as you're eating any type of sugar. Walking is also very helpful for it. And also just from a caloric standpoint, right? Burning enough calories. Second piece of managing insulin resistance, you have to lower your carbohydrate intake. Okay, so you have to lower it. Does not mean that it has to be crazy low carbs. You still need some carbohydrates, okay? But you're going to need to be in a moderate to low carb diet, okay? Limit processed foods and sugar, because those things, of course, are what are keeping the insulin resistance cycle going. Another way to combat this is anytime you do have a carbohydrate. So I mentioned a bagel earlier. One way to combat this. So let's say you're like, I really like bagels. Okay. You're like, I don't want to give up my bagel. That's cool. That's fine. But you're going to have to eat a protein with it. Okay. So my suggestion is to eat a little bit of the protein first before you have the bagel. Okay. It's going to help manage the blood sugar, and then you're not going to store it as body fat. Okay. So just keep that in mind. So don't eat a bagel by itself. All right. Make sure you've got eggs with it, or I don't know, the slices of deli turkey or something like that. Okay. Next piece is increasing fiber intake. So you got to eat more whole foods. And then supplementation. Here are some helpful ones for insulin resistance: inositol, berberine, chromium, and alpha lipoic acid are very helpful, okay, for managing those symptoms. And then managing stress hormones. Walking is one of the best ways to manage stress hormones. Walking anywhere between 7,000 to 10,000 steps per day. I just read this study that was so amazing to me, because we're all like working from home, that the average that people are walking a day is like 15 to 2,000 steps right now. Like, not good. Okay. Bare minimum movement for a human a day is 4,000 steps. Like bare minimum. Okay. So we've got to improve that overall, just as a society. We just have to be better about it. The reason why it's 7 to 10 is recent research has shown that from a heart health standpoint, there's no difference between 7,000 and 10,000 steps. Okay. Now, from a caloric standpoint, you're obviously going to burn more calories if you hit 10. But from an overall health standpoint and stress hormone, insulin resistance standpoint, 7,000 is a great aiming point. Okay. Much more realistic. Other things for managing stress hormones, it's going to be limiting caffeine. Okay, I know that's a bummer maybe for some of you. And then alcohol. So this is one of those things where you're not going to be able to drink the same amount that you did in your 30s, okay, or earlier. Your 40s and 50s, alcohol, it's pure sugar. Okay, so that's ultimately what it is. It's pure glycogen. So it is basically going to store as body fat. Okay, and not only that, but it also increases your stress hormones. So in the moment, it might feel kind of like where you feel better after having a glass of wine or something, but it actually increases anxiety. Okay, so the next day, you're going to feel more anxious. Okay, and your cortisol levels are going to increase. Okay, so we want to limit alcohol. It just kind of is the way of life once you get into your 40s and 50s. Okay. Aiming for 8 hours of sleep. This might not be anything new to any of you, but aim for 8 hours of sleep. Try to get into a good sleep routine. Sleeping is going to rebuild your muscle, which again, we need, right? We need as much muscle mass as we can. Stimulates the growth hormone. It's the only time that your muscles are going to repair and grow is when you sleep. Okay. And then it also will decrease those stress hormones. So less belly fat. Drink enough water to help with water retention. So we talked about estrogen on the hormone page, if you remember, how those fluctuations cause a lot of water retention, make you feel fluffy. That's kind of the best way to describe it. I feel like fluffy is the good, you're like, oh, it just feels like I'm holding on to all that water. If you drink more water, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but the more water you drink, the less water you will retain. Okay, so make sure you're drinking enough water. And then supplementation here for stress hormones, a couple of options. So magnesium, vitamin D, CBD oil, either oil or you can take it in pill form as well. And then ashwagandha. Okay, so those are just a few that can be very helpful. Okay, so we're getting towards the bottom line here. I'm hoping that this is helping and you guys are learning some things. But the bottom line, so this is the most important. Okay, this is the very most important thing, I will say, the whole conversation, is that you're going to need to accept that you will have to adapt to what your new body needs now. Okay, so instead of being frustrated that it's not doing what it did in your 20s and 30s, you have to have and accept that you're in a transition in life. Okay, it's not a bad transition, but it's a transition that you need to adjust your lifestyle and behaviors, okay, to support your body, okay, and support it during this change. Okay, so it's the most important thing I will say this entire conversation is you have to accept that you need to adapt. Okay, what you're doing right now is not working, so you have to make some changes. All right. Second piece is also a mindset piece. You have to believe that you can manage the symptoms to lose weight. Okay, that you do have some power over this. Because when we talk to physicians, it can make you feel powerless. It can make you feel like, oh, this process is just part of life and I'm just stuck, right? Like you can just feel like you're stuck. But you have to start believing that you can actually manage the symptoms. You can do that. Next, your food choices are going to need to be intentional. This is going to be a change for some of you. Maybe in the past, maybe there's a possibility you've never dealt with weight issues. So you haven't really had to think about it. Now you're going to have to think about things like, those carbs, like those things are going to store as body fat when I eat them. Okay, so you have to be intentional about your choices. You're going to have to lift weights. You have to do it. If you haven't, started doing that, start it tomorrow. Okay. So if you haven't started doing that, do that now. Muscle mass and actually grip strength is the #1 indicator of how long you will live. Okay. So just a little fun fact there, but the amount of muscle mass that you have. Next, this might be the second most important, is you're going to need patience and consistency. Please, for all that is holy, do not do any more cleanses. Okay, don't do it. Okay, be patient and have consistency. Build a routine, develop a routine around your strength training and your nutrition. Okay, develop a routine and system around those two things, and then do them over and over and over again. Don't jump on and off programs. Don't do that, because every time that you do a cleanse or you do a crash diet or you do something like that, you're ruining that basal metabolic rate that we talked about. Every time it's going to decrease even more. Okay. And then we get to a point, as I say, as a nutrition coach, I see it all the time. And they're like, oh, I lost 10 pounds, but then I gained back 20. It's like, well, yes, because now you're burning 500 calories less than you were before you even started the program that you did before. Okay, so you're losing more muscle mass the lower your calories go. Okay, so you're going to need to make sure you're getting, so my tip there, get that protein in. That's the #1 thing that you can do. Get your 100 grams of protein. Practice patience and consistency. Carry out a routine and not bouncing from thing to thing. Okay. The last piece here, this is a whole nother topic. Okay. Bioidentical hormone replacement therapy and peptides can be helpful with other symptoms as well as weight loss. Okay. When used in conjunction with strength training and nutrition. So you cannot use these things and not do strength training and work on your nutrition, because it's still a lifestyle change. So that's like a whole nother topic that I totally am going to do another webinar on, but they are available. Okay. And I have connections for that too, if that's something that ever interests you or you need more information on. So what can you do today or tomorrow to get started on this? Okay. Number one, track your food intake. Okay, remember, you could be 20 to 30% off. So if you're not seeing any movement on the scale, just be aware of that. Two apps that we've used in the past, the one that we currently use with all of our clients is Chronometer. It's free, so it's free. You can track in there. MyFitnessPal has been used in the past too. I think now, I could be wrong, but I think some of the things you have to pay for in there now. So just be aware of that. But Chronometer is free. The next step, start walking tomorrow. Start walking 7,000 to 10,000 steps. Okay. If that's the one thing you do tomorrow, that is beneficial to so many aspects of your health. Okay. So that's what, and it has to be a commitment to doing it every day. Okay. And then 3, strength training 2 to 3 times per week. Okay. So those are your 3 things that are going to start to rebuild your metabolism that over the last 10 to 15 years, right? 40, let's say 40 to 55 has been slowly being knocked down. Okay. So those 3 things are going to help you rebuild your metabolism. Okay. So control what you can control there. And then your next step. So let's say you start doing those things. What can be very helpful? Number 1 is figuring out what your actual basal metabolic rate is right now. Okay, so if you are near the Naperville area, I know some of you are not, but if you are near the Naperville area, that's where my gym is located, and we can do an in-body for you where you would step on and it would tell you what your basal metabolic rate is. Okay, and that's a great starting point to figure out where your caloric intake should begin. Okay, so that can be very helpful. Otherwise, you kind of feel like you're just floating and not knowing how much you should be taking in, right, in terms of food. So if you are someone who is out of town, you're not from Naperville, I can find you someone who can do your basal metabolic rate as well through like network of people that have in-bodies. So if that's something that interests you as well, I can connect you with someone that can get that for you. The second piece is, of course, getting a coach. If you're feeling like you are lost, not know where to start, need support, accountability is huge, of course, with nutrition and fitness and developing new routines. Get a coach. Okay, so get someone to hold you accountable and track your progress and get you into those routines that we talked about, where it can be a lifestyle and long-term change. Okay, you have to accept, remember, have to accept this is a lifestyle change. This is not a 6-week, even 6-month deal. This is lifetime. Okay, so find yourself a coach. 3, your next step. One of the hardest things about losing weight, no matter what your age is having no social support. Okay, so this might be one of the hardest things for some of you, whoever you are living with, it's usually the person that you're living with. You might have to have a conversation with them about how this is a new stage in your life. Okay, it's a new stage in your life where you are going to have to make lifestyle adjustments in order to feel better, have better energy, lose weight, and just overall enjoy this time in your life. You're going to have to make some nutritional changes and things like that and get them on board with you. Okay, so the people that love you, care about you, want you to feel better are going to support you in that. Okay, so that could be one of the hardest things. It can be too, one of the things is having them do some of this with you. Maybe it's a best friend, or somebody where they come, they're working out with you, or they're like, okay, we're going to work on our tracking together or whatever it is, right? So maybe that's also some social support. But the hardest aspect, there's two when it comes to nutrition. Number one is environment, and number two is social support. So if those two things are not right, it's going to be very challenging to be successful long-term in your lifestyle change. Okay, so very, very important to talk to that person that you spend the most time with. Okay, so I wanted to talk about that. And then as we wrap up here, so one thing is that I do obviously one-on-one nutrition, so I do that. And I wanted to let you guys know that I do have, I think Steve somewhere, wherever Steve's on here somewhere. Like he's on there somewhere. He can share with you guys the link to book an info call with me in the first 10 people that book. It will be free. You can ask me questions. I can help you with supplementation. I can, whatever you need, I will do. So those first 10 people to book will be free. Anything that you want to know, maybe it's about HRT or whatever it is, I'm happy to help, and I'll be an open book, so you can book there. Steve's somewhere, he'll provide you the link. I think he's going to send it to you too, but there it is. It's like, it's coming, it's somewhere. But if you need that, I wanted to share a story really quick too about one of my clients that I'm actually currently working with. And she's been somebody who's struggled her whole life with insulin resistance as well. Okay. And you know, it's been a very frustrating journey going through binging and not understanding what's happening to her body. And just over the course of, gosh, like the last 6 weeks, I've finally gotten to that light bulb moment for her. So my hope is that today, maybe some of you had a light bulb moment, like, oh, this is what's happening to me. And when she had this light bulb moment, it was like, oh, like I'm not crazy. Number one, because she had kept thinking she was crazy, that she was doing this behavior, right? She had no control over it. And once we had this light bulb moment, it just took off. Okay. She just was like, I accept that this is the way that my body is working, and I need to work with it instead of against it. Okay. And so within the last 5 weeks, she's lost 15 pounds. She's feeling so much better. She's encouraged. She's motivated. But I want you to know that she was in a bad place ultimately. I mean, mentally was just like, I can't do this. There's no way this is ever happening for me. And then once we finally got where we explained what's going on with her body, she was like, oh, like I do have some control over this. So my hope is today that you guys have a little bit of that feeling of like, okay, now that I understand what's happening, I can make some of these adjustments that I didn't even know I should be doing, right? Your doctor probably didn't tell you that you should be eating low carb because of insulin resistance, right? They just say, eat better, move. It's like, well, that's not helpful. That's, you know, so that's my hope today, that I gave you some information to have one of those light bulb moments that can make those lifestyle changes stick. Okay. All right. So I'm going to open the floor for questions. Thank you for sticking with me on this. If you can't tell, this is seriously, I'm so passionate about this. So I appreciate you guys sticking with me for the hour. So I'd like to take a few questions. So if you guys have anything, I would love to hear from you. So if you want, you guys can unmute yourself. Or I don't know if this one has like a raise your hand or anything. I don't think so. But if not, unmute yourself. If you have any questions for me. Does anybody have anything? Oop, let's see. Oh, my goodness. Anybody have anything for me? Okay. It's quiet. How about what if you guys in the chat, can you say in the chat for me, what's one thing that you learned today that you had no idea was happening, or that you can implement tomorrow? And type that in the chat for me. Great question, Jenny. Okay, so Jenny just asked, have there been any studies on new injectable weight loss medications and menopause? No. Okay, so I wouldn't say there have been studies on them. But peptides, so that's what they are. Okay, so when we say like weight loss injections, I want to be very clear that they can be extremely helpful, okay, for some people that are experiencing, or in particular have always experienced weight issues. But the weight loss medications, I can't say that there are studies, they're so new for weight loss in particular, okay, if that makes sense, that there's nothing that says they're amazing for menopause or anything like that. But I will say that things like semaglutide have been studied for years, okay, and their effect on type 2 diabetes in particular, which of course is part of insulin resistance. Okay, so there is, of course, in my opinion, it could be very helpful. All right, so let's see. I don't know if that answered it for you, Jenny. Jenny, let me know if that like answered. So are there studies? Because that's what you asked. Not yet, but I assume there will be, if that makes sense. Okay, it's too new for that area. Okay. Water retention. So Uzma, can you maybe give me a little bit more information on what you mean about water retention? And then Naz, oh good, okay, that helped Jenny, good. Okay, then Naz said, okay, the amount of muscle mass lost year to year. So in terms of muscle mass, every 10 years on average, people lose 3 to 8%, which is a lot. Okay, 8% is on the high end, but it's a lot. Okay. And then help with insulin resistance, semaglutide, we talked about that a little bit. So those are peptides. So they're very, very popular right now, if you haven't heard. And they can be helpful, but the only thing with these medications is you have to be strength training with them, because what happens is they decrease the amount of calories so much that you are eating, you will actually continue to lose muscle mass. And then when you come off the medication, you will gain the weight back if you have not been strength training. Okay, so I've seen some great results with people who have used things like semaglutide's one, tirzepatide is a peptide. And I want to be very clear, this is a whole nother conversation, but peptides are not like scary drugs, okay? Your body should be secreting GLP-1, okay, which is what these medications are, okay? Your body should be doing that, and it's connected to insulin, okay? So that's what's happening ultimately. But they're not like you're taking some weird thing that your body shouldn't be producing. Like your body should be producing these things, these peptides, and they might not be. Okay, so that's why people are seeing success with them. But you have to be strength training. You have to, otherwise you will gain all the weight back. Okay. Let's see. Ba, 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 ba. Okay, that helped Jenny. Oh, Tracy, great. What's the best way to supplement with berberine, inositol, and chromium? So it is pretty individual. I will say that, so instead of doing something like a peptide, right, like semaglutide or anything like that, all three of these are great options. Okay, so berberine is the closest probably. That's probably where you would want to start. Thorne has a great berberine supplement. But and inositol is really good too. I take it during pregnancy actually to help with insulin resistance. So, but I would say, in my opinion, I've used all of them, but berberine and inositol are probably the top two. So that's a great question. Uzma, the one thing I learned about water retention is another cause of weight gain. Absolutely. So yeah, those estrogen levels, they get crazy, and you'll feel like, right, that's why too, people, the scale is tricky. Okay, because if your estrogen levels are a little wonky and your water retention, you're like, I'm working so hard, and then you step on the scale and it's high. And it's like, well, it could just be that your estrogen levels are off, and now you've retained a bunch of water, and now you're frustrated and you don't want to work out or eat better anymore because you saw the weight on there when really it was just water, right? So yeah, so that can definitely be really frustrating. Yay, Jackie did a call. It's excellent. Great job, Tracy. Yay. Okay. Um, and Naz just talked to the patient about that need to be strength training, right? If you do any peptides or anything, you gotta strength train, otherwise you're gonna be right back where you started. Oh, Sandy asked, can your basal metabolic rate be taken by anyone at the gym? Absolutely. Yep. Any of the coaches can do it for you that are there. No problem, Naz. Thank you so much for coming. All right. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay. Well, I'm so grateful for you guys being here today. I hope you learned something about yourself, and maybe what your next action steps will be. And again, I'm happy to hop on a call with any of you, give you any information, any help that you might need. That's what I'm here for, and that's what I love to do. So I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you to everybody. So, all right, you guys have a wonderful evening. Okay. Thank you for coming. And we will see you guys soon, okay? Oh, all right. Bye, everybody.